One of the purest, free-roaming bunch of Spanish horses in the United States today are those little horses up there in Pushmataha County in southeast Oklahoma. And we took that as a really big honor, you know, and there was no way that we would have put any other kind of horse into them, whether it was Lusitano, Syrahs, or anything of good Spanish blood. We wanted them to stay just like we think that they were when the Choctaw people brought them here, and the Chickasaw people brought them here, you know. And that was what was so important. And my wife and I, we spent our life savings keeping those horses that way from that time on, you know. Our kids gave up a lot, you know, going to school, going to college, going to OSU and different places, you know, to promote and save these horses. And there's not a day that goes by, you know, not one day that goes by that these horses hadn't occupied my mind for 30 years. No matter what kind of a situation, no matter how bad it's been with family situations or whatever, you know, some point in time during that day, I know I've got to go tend to a horse. After we leave Choctaw, we'll go up to Fossil River and put out salt up there. And this is pretty much a regular routine tour that I do every other day in the winter months, but now I don't have to go to all those pastures unless there's a problem at one of them through the summer. And then now we're fortunate enough to have a new pasture on Highway 93 that we've got 20 head on, and of course they're the ones that really are in horse heaven there as far as plenty to eat and not much effort getting the food because it's all right there on 40 acres and it's good, well fertilized, improved pasture, and they do very well there. But when I go by there, it makes me a minimum of an 85-mile circle. And if I don't go by there, just starting where we're going, it's an 80-mile round trip back to here. Spend lots of times a day getting in and out of your truck, opening gates, shutting gates, locking wheels in, locking them out.
The story really starts just after the dinosaurs on this land. One of the earliest ancestors of the horse that's been traced is an animal known as Eohippus. And it was about the size of a dog. It lived in tropical forests on this continent and also in Europe about 50 million years ago. And over the next 45 million years or so, it slowly changed to become today's horse. You know, the size of today's horse, adapted to living on the plains of the United States and the steppes of Eurasia. And this animal was living here at the time that archaeologists tell us the earliest humans on this continent. About 6,000 years ago in Ukraine, the horse was domesticated, people started riding it. Here in North America, conversely, indigenous societies developed without the horse, even though it was originally a native animal. About 1690, the Choctaws acquired the horse from the Caddo tribe. They were our neighbors to the west. And the Caddos had in turn received the horse from the Wichita and some of the tribes still farther to the west, who acquired it from the Spanish settlements in present-day New Mexico. After the Choctaws received the horse, we passed it along to our eastern neighbors, the Muskogee Creeks. The Choctaw name for horse is Isolba, which comes from the words Issi and Holba. It means like a deer. And the fact that Choctaws would give the horse this name signifies its importance. You know, the deer was the most important animal in Choctaw traditional culture. It was our main food animal. It was something that was intimately tied in with the Choctaw way of thinking about the world. Today there are stereotypes of Indians chasing buffalo on horseback, or with feather bonnets, or there's the famous scene of the native person with his head down on the horse at the end of the trail. None of those really apply to Choctaw people. The horse did change our traditional culture. In some ways it helped us to retain our traditional culture. But more than anything, the story of the horse and the Choctaw people shows how Choctaw people and traditional culture have adapted to changing circumstances through time. Horses were a part of Choctaw funerals. When a man passed away, one part of the funeral rite was that the community would kill his horse and then they would roast it and eat it at a funeral dinner. And in a way that sort of symbolized the connection between the man and his horse, and it also symbolized the horse going on with him into the next life. It had become that important in Choctaw society. By the late 1820s, the Choctaw horse herd was about 15,000 animals. And of course, Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, setting up the Choctaw Trail of Tears. The Choctaw horse herd was so large that some of the removal agents had talked about building a barge specifically to transport Choctaw horses to Indian Territory, present-day southeastern Oklahoma. Of course, it would have taken multiple trips, but they didn't end up doing that. At least 2,000 and probably many more Choctaw horses were lost on the Trail of Tears. But of course, a lot of them ended up coming into Indian Territory, and they were used by the people here. Accounts from the time period talk about Choctaws hooking up plows to the horse and using them to plow the fields. Choctaws in Oklahoma developed a significant cattle economy with thousands of head of cattle. There were Choctaw cowboys, and they rode horses, of course. This in itself it didn't completely go out of practice, but it was hampered by the American Civil War. The Choctaw cattle herds were decimated through the famine that occurred and through stealing. Well, the conservation of the Choctaw Pony is incredibly important in my opinion, and I have personal connections with it. My wife's family was one of the last families that was raising the horses. Their name's Iachabi, and the horses on Blackjack Mountain come from some of the horses that they raised. My understanding is that there are only about 350 Choctaw ponies left that we know about for sure. And conserving that breed is important because it's tied to 500 years of Choctaw history. For good or bad, they've been there and been a part of us for that long. So the efforts of a few, much like the American bison, the efforts of a few were able to save this amazing animal. The same thing is occurring right now with the Choctaw Pony.
That's the only kind of horse I had when I was a kid, was a little Choctaw horse, because they were kind of considered by people in the quarter horse age at that time of being the inferior broomtail. But they had all kinds of names for them, I was proud of my horse. She was my buddy, but I felt a little bit inferior because all of my friends had bigger, more blocky, stouter made kind of horses, to ride. Even though I could do anything with my horse they ever did with theirs. And most of the time I could outdo it, on her. See how wild she is. Whoa, 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 whoa. How many horses can you do that to? But I still wanted, I thought when I grow up, when I get a job, I'll have some good quarter horses, and I did, you know. And then my kids come along, then I wanted a horse like I had when I was a kid, and I couldn't find them. And I looked and looked, went through a lot of different breeds and different horses and all. And finally when my dad, my mom, my brothers kept telling me about Gilbert Jones, a man named George Porner had told me about him having the same kind of horses as what I had as a kid, you know. This is my old buddy here. He's OKP. I can start to saddle another horse. This horse will come and crowd in between me and the other horse, want me to put my saddle on him. So finally when I went up and met him and went through all of his picture albums and went out and looked at the bands of horses running on Blackjack Mountain, it just won my heart over, you know. And before long, I was getting rid of all my quarter horses and trading straight across when I could for a pure Choctaw, you know, of the few people around up there that still had them, mainly the Selfs, and that still had some of them. The LaFleurs still had some of them. By '84, I had gathered up like nine females that was considered by the registry, which Gilbert Jones had at that time, the Southwest Spanish Mustang Association, as being pure Oklahoma Choctaws. Most of all of his horses were had some Comanche and Kiowa blood, Apache. Some horses he brought from Horse Peak, New Mexico here that he had gathered up over the Llano Estacado, the Staked Plains of Texas, for years, and from New Mexico. And so they were mainly mixed in all his horses. He still considered them Choctaw horses because if they only had a half Choctaw or a quarter or an eighth or whatever, he was considered Choctaw. But when I went through the records and I was seeing all of that, I was thinking, but I want horses to be just like the one I had, the same blood, full blood, you know, Choctaw in my opinion, you know. And he said, well, you sound just like Dr. Spangenberg. And I said, well, what about him? And he says, well, he said there wasn't nobody breeding them pure, you know, that they were all going to run out one of these days and they wouldn't be a pure Oklahoma Choctaw.
The history of the Choctaw horses starts in the early colonial times for the Spanish influence in the southeast of the United States. And the Spaniards brought horses both to Florida and as well as the Mississippi and Alabama regions, so where the Choctaw Nation originated. And the Choctaws were one of the tribes that had a lot of horses and managed them quite closely, and were really, really good horse breeders. Their horses were renowned along with the Chickasaw horses. And they helped the Choctaws develop into a major trading nation, especially with deer hides and other commodities. And then when Andrew Jackson removed the nation to Oklahoma in the 1830s, the Choctaws took their horses with them. So this is where the story picks up later when we see that as late as the 70s, there were probably 1,500 to 2,000 of the horses, the old Choctaw horses, running on the mountains there. And at that time they started to sell them off. Horse meat was high during those days. And basically very, very few people kept them going, but there were some. And Gilbert Jones was one of those, Bryant Rickman and some others, including some old Choctaw families like the Thurmans and the Carters, also had the horses. Find that we do have enough to basically go ahead and conserve them, and we start a program with the Rickmans mainly of trying to manage the horses so that that Choctaw lineage doesn't disappear. We were always looking for new horses, and we also tried to manage the ones that we knew about quite closely so that we could manage the genetics of them and keep the line going. And then in the late 70s and the early 80s, the numbers started to fall, and so that's when we became concerned, and then started actually putting together detailed breeding programs and trying to really help keep them going. It was probably the mid-80s. So ever since then, we've been working with them closely, trying to locate more of them, trying to use what we had to make sure that none of the different lines disappeared. We know that they're Choctaw ponies from a variety of different ways we can investigate it. One is the history. So the histories that these old families kept was quite detailed. Many of them, they know the horses' names and the horses' ancestors' names back to the 1800s, So pretty impressive, but that's typical of any sort of culture that has a deep family relationship and also a deep oral tradition. In addition, the appearance of those horses was fairly consistent, so that it's consistent enough that you can recognize those horses. And it was consistent enough that when I encountered some horses in South Mississippi in the old original Choctaw homeland that were identical in type, we wondered if they could be Choctaw horses, and it turned out that that appearance was so typical. We did the DNA studies, and without the person who did those knowing that we thought they were Choctaw horses, he said, well, these appear to be Choctaw horses, which was also proof that the appearance and the history and all that fits together to go together to make sure that they are in fact a real thing. The history of genetics has really changed in the last decades. And originally when we did this, we did blood typing. And most of that's done through Gus Cothran, and he was at the University of Kentucky then. And his work involves a lot of different of these old Spanish strains. So he's able to compare and contrast these across different groups. The Choctaws are certainly central in that whole family of lines. And as time goes on, we do more and more DNA instead of actual blood types. And the DNA has advantages and some disadvantages, but mostly advantages. And so we're able to determine all the relationships with other breeds and also to keep the lines going and to figure out if we're hitting a genetic bottleneck or something like that. Gus and I have worked closely together on a number of projects, the horses being the main one. And over time, we've discovered that the history and the appearance and the genetics always all go together. So all three of them are necessary and all three of them are reliable. Choctaw ponies and a lot of the other breeds like them, so even the Choctaw hogs, for example, they're an example of a long relationship of a certain people with a certain animal. And so much as we save historic buildings or we save other monuments, this is a sort of living monument to a nation. And I think it's important for that reason. Another reason that they're important is they have variation that other breeds don't have. They have a history that other breeds don't have. So they offer us something that other breeds don't offer. And what they offer is especially just a robust, resistant sort of type that can get out there in the mountains and live and survive and actually be useful for work. In some big ranches, they've used Choctaw horses instead of bigger quarter horses because they could use the horse all day instead of having to change horses halfway through the day. So just that endurance has been important. And it's just important to save those sort of variations so that future generations have the option to choose that our ancestors gave us. So working in partnership with the breeders, working in partnership with the Choctaw Nation, all these are extremely important to keep this resource alive and going and part of that ongoing history of relationship.
I'm Mary Carter McConnell, and we're standing at Summer Duck Wood, my farm in Rapidan, Virginia. And we're standing here with Moves Like the Moon, who came here from Oklahoma in 2008 as a weanling from the Rickman herd. And she has now been hunter jumper, field trials, fox hunts, and is a fabulous Choctaw pony. We had ponies as kids, always loved horses, grew up bouncing around the backyard, and got very interested in these horses through the Livestock Conservancy and the heritage breeds that we were interested in. I didn't have a Choctaw pony as a kid, but I wish I had, because they're fabulous ponies and they're great. They're so gentle, they're so comfortable, they're so accommodating, and they will go all day. So if you're a kid who likes to ride, it's kind of a perfect pony. And they do all the sports. They're so versatile. So I wish I had had a Choctaw pony when I was a kid. Well, we were with Phil Sponenberg and the Livestock Conservancy at Debbie Hamilton's rare breed farm in Vermont. And Phil knew I was using gaited horses for field trials to run my bird dogs. And he pointed out these beautiful ponies that Debbie had and said they're Choctaw. And I didn't know there was a Choctaw horse. It's not something that's generally known in America. And I was like, Choctaw? And so looking at them, and then we decided we would take a small breeding pod. And so we worked with Phil and the Rickmans, looking at horses on the ground in Oklahoma, and then doing the pedigrees with Phil Sponenberg to figure out how to bring. We brought 4 mares and 2 stallions and a foal, who you'll see in a minute, who's now grown up, in 2007. And that was our first breeding group. And then in 2008, when they pulled the lease on Blackjack Mountain, and there were a lot of horses that needed a new place to move to, we took another group. We took a set of weanlings, and we took some other lines that we were interested in and that we knew we had to protect. I think we don't, when you say the Choctaw Nation, or, you know, think of Indians and horses, you think of the Plains Indians, you know, and the, you know, dramatic counting coup on ponies, etc. And the Choctaw have been breeding since the 16th century, and the Chickasaw and all the southeastern tribes, and each of them bred for specific things. And you can, when you see what the Choctaw were using them for, the versatility mattered. They hunted on them, they fought on them, they picked up deer on them. You know, they put their children on them before they could walk. They weren't going to breed a stupid horse. You know, so they really bred for intelligence, versatility, endurance, and then the whole removal culled out anything that wasn't strong. And I think part of why we don't think about horses and southeastern tribes is because of the shame of the removal. I think it's part of American history that people don't want to talk about. It makes everybody uncomfortable because the people died, the animals died, the horses died, but the horses were part of that, and they carried the people. And you know, when you read some of the texts on the removal, it breaks your heart, and you realize the horses were part of the saving of people. And there has been research done on the horses and how they came in which families, and through a lot of the Army records. You know, what's changed for me when I think about Choctaw as a nation is I now think, man, they were really great breeders, not only with horses, but cattle, pigs, livestock in general. And they knew how to select, they knew how to pick a trait and build on that. And if you look at the shape of the horse, it's distinctive. If you look at the mind of the horse, it's distinctive. And people have noted that, like some of the trainers have said to me, they actually, you know, treat you more as if they were a dog than a horse, because they bond with you, and they love to work. You know, the thing we notice is once they get a job and they know the person they're doing it with, they want to do the job. So you've heard the ones yelling earlier, pick me, or you're riding him today, you should be riding me. So they love the work they're doing with people. You know, this is exciting. So introducing these horses to Virginia has been a lot of fun. When people come up and say, what kind of pony is that? You know, you're very proud to say Choctaw.
But I told him that, I said, Gilbert, as long as I can, I'll take care of these horses, you know. And he said, I know you will. And now, I'm kind of in the place, I'm not as old as he was then, but he was probably always a better man than what I am physically. and so I don't think that I will live to be 93 years old like he was, you know. I hope I do, you know, and I hope I can take care of the horses, but when I'm gone, I do worry about them, because they are something that deserves, they have a heritage, and they really, really deserve to go on. And I think they really deserved, not just to the Choctaw people or the Native American people, but for all of mankind.